Welcome to Modular Games. My name is Kyle, and today I have a module for you. It's not an adventure module or anything like that. It is a rules module. It is a way for you to hack your game to give it a different look and feel, make it a little bit more exciting. In particular, today we're talking about a new spell casting system. Now, this is not a completely unique system. I've seen it show up in a couple of places, but it seems to be very rare. By default, in role-playing games, whether those be tabletop games or even video games, we tend to have a situation where whenever a spellcaster gains a character level, they're going to select one or more new spells, and these new spells generally are much more powerful than the previous spells that they had, and as they get higher and higher and higher level, they kind of forget about their low-level spells or the low-level versions of their spells because they never use them anymore. Also, there's an issue selecting new spells at every level that you kind of just get a weird mishmash of things where it's not very thematic, and you just picked out whatever spells seemed like they were most effective for that spell level, and the fact that they don't really match up with each other, or they're not in the same school of magic, or they don't deal the same type of damage, or nobody cares about those things. They're just whatever spells you had access to, you picked the best ones. And while this can be good, it gives you a lot of flexibility and options, it gives essentially nothing in the way of continuity explaining how and why the wizard or whoever it is ended up gaining this type of magic. The alternative that I'm presenting today is upgradable spells. Instead of having a list of spells, level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, you're going to have basic spells, non-basic spells, arcane spells, and meta spells. So, basic spells first. Basic spells are basically first level spells that have very generic effects, and basic spells are designed specifically so that they can be multi-purpose. There are going to be very few damaging effects here. There are going to be a lot of utility effects. Next, after the basic spells, are the non-basic spells. Non-basic spells are essentially exactly the same thing as basic spells, but they're a little bit more specific, they're a little bit more powerful, and you need to explain to your game master why you qualify to cast this particular spell. Let's say it's a summoning spell. Conjure animals. Okay, why are you able to conjure animals? Do you have a close connection to animals? Do you already have some other summoning spell? Maybe you've been apprenticed to a druid or a member of the druid class, so even though you don't have an applicable spell, you still have a close connection. You have to explain why this is. Of any of these four categories, the non-basic spells might be the one that you toss out and don't use. Okay, next one is the meta spells. Meta spells are like meta magic features. Essentially, you learn it just the same way that you would learn any other spell, except that you never cast a meta spell. Instead, it is a modification to other spells that you know. It is a modification that you can apply to any other spell that you know. So if you have, burning hands, you can make the burning hands happen twice, or you can make the burning hands twice as intense or twice as hot. Maybe you want it to linger, so you create a sheet of fire that just stays there for 10 seconds. Maybe there's a meta spell that's just called permanency, so any non-instantaneous effect continues working until dispelled. Maybe you have a meta spell called dispel, which just ends the effect of another spell that you've encountered. Okay, next category. We have arcane spells. Arcane spells are your leveled spells. The rule for arcane spells is that you need to know at least 2 spells of the next lower level. Basic spells are considered level 1, which means there are no for level 1 arcane spells. They start at level 2. So you can't learn a level 2 arcane spell until you know at least 2 basic spells. You can't learn a level 3 arcane spell until you learn 2 level 2 spells. And arcane spells are special because the mana cost of an arcane spell is always equal to its spell level, whereas the mana cost for a basic spell does not necessarily match its spell level. In fact, basic spells don't have a spell level. Some of them might cost, let's say, 5 mana for astral projection. It's a pretty basic effect, but it's super costly. Meanwhile, something else might just cost 1 mana. Or maybe you have a really advanced spell that is very complicated. We haven't covered those yet, but it still only costs 1 mana. And the way you end up getting those type of advanced spell effects is something called spell upgrades. Any basic spell you can learn generally will have a few upgrades associated with it. Let's take the decay spell, for example. Most basic upgrade is deal more damage. What else can you do to upgrade a decay spell? Well, maybe not only do you affect that target, but it spreads to anything that the target touches, like it's some kind of a disease that's contagious. That would be a very interesting spell, also a very dangerous spell. Maybe you want to have a delaying effect. That sounds like a meta spell, actually, because a delaying effect could be applied to anything. I think you start to get the idea. And the thing that really brings together this system is that not only do you have all these different categories of spells that you can use, but the core feature is combining spell effects together. This is something that a lot of players and game masters kind of don't get because they're afraid that they might not be allowed to do things, but once they realize that yes, that is exactly what you're supposed to do, they get really excited about it. And this effect is that you can cut and paste certain spell effects from spells that you know and combine them together to create new spells. Let's say that you have a control wind spell, which allows you to control wind, kind of like an airbender around you in something like a 50-foot range. And one of the effects allowed by the control wind spell is that you can create a blast of wind that's at a 15-foot cone, and you want to combine this with the decay spell. Well, decay deals damage over time, so maybe you combine these two spells and maybe it's called something really non-descriptive but foreboding, like the east wind. The east wind brings destruction, so you blow the wind, and wherever the wind goes, it's going to infect creatures with a reduced version of the decay spell. Instead of dealing 1d12 damage per round, it's going to deal damage to all of them for 1d4 damage per round. And guess what? The control wind spell, it lasts for about an hour, so you can just do this non-stop for a whole hour. That is a lot of damage that you can deal, whereas the regular decay spell, I mean, it's a powerhouse spell. It deals a lot of damage, but it only happens once. And the fact that you can combine this, maybe you want to enlarge the spell so that it affects, instead of a 50-foot area around you, it's going to affect a city block. Well, guess what? You just combine control winds, you combine decay, you combine enlarge spell. That is 3 spell effects. It's the equivalent of a 3rd level spell. But goodness gracious, that's terrifying. And not only do you get to mix and match these effects, but you also get to have a direct line of reasoning for why your spellcaster knows these abilities. And one of the things that you'll find when you're combining these effects is that upgrades really matter. If you combine 2 spell effects and then apply one of the spell upgrades, maybe you'll get a bigger effect than if you upgraded before you combine the spell effects. Other times, if you upgrade first and then combine them afterwards, you can get a very specific spell effect. Well, what would be a very specific spell effect that doesn't cost very much? How about aneurysm? Aneurysm. You create a tiny little bead of force, about the size of your fingernail or something, but it's inside of somebody's head, which means that you need to target them. You need some kind of divination magic to find the correct location to create this bead of force, and then oh, look, they have no blood flow. They fell unconscious. So you can see how a very complicated spell effect wouldn't cost very much, but you might need to learn 6 or 7 prerequisites before you're able to actually use them. In this way, your mages actually have a lot of choices. You can change up the way that you learn spells. Maybe you just learn spells the exact same way that you did before. You get, let's say, 2 spells learned every time you level up. Well, that means that you get to choose between a new basic spell, which gives you a much broader reach for what kinds of things you can do, or a spell upgrade that makes that one spell much better, or a metamagic spell, which allows you to customize any spell effect you want, or maybe one of the new spells that you're going to learn is a combined spell, where you are combining these spells together and getting a completely unique spell effect that produces your upper level things. Well, if you want Meteor Swarm, for example, that's actually an extraordinarily simple spell. You just need to make it big enough and give it long enough range, and deal damage. I mean, it's just a lot of fire, right? Maybe Meteor Swarm isn't a 9th level spell. Maybe it's a 4th level spell that just happens to cost 15 mana. Depending on how big your normal mana pool is, I'm assuming that it's somewhere around 10. And so maybe Meteor Swarm is a very simple spell, but it takes 2 or 3 people to cast it, and all 3 of them need to know the spell. If you have, let's say, a country that employs war mages, maybe it's something that gets taught to their war mages just as a natural part of their curriculum so that they can use it during warfare. Meanwhile, a regular adventurer has no reason to learn that spell because it can only be cast cooperatively with that many people, because you don't have a mana pool big enough to produce that kind of spell effect, despite the fact that it's relatively simple. In any case, I've gone over my time. Tell me what you think. I'm really excited about it.